Warning, this is not your normal podcast. Its purpose is to provide thought-provoking dialogue with a slanted perspective. Here we encourage influential conversations. Give us a listen, like and share. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Welcome to CEO and the Doctor.
Yo, good afternoon. This is CEO and the Doctor. Something a little different. I got to credit
Very different.
my co-host over there. This is his idea. We did a show a few weeks ago about critical race theory, and so we decided to bring something different to our show, but it's completely kind of exclusive to it. Something we kind of like, trying to start 30 minutes of CRT, CEO and the Doctor. So we're gonna initially start with, what is critical race theory, and then each lesson, because we're looking at these as lessons, we'll build as we learn. You'll learn, and if it's something that you're not talking about, we're hoping to get you talking about it. So yeah, P, I'll go ahead and let you introduce why this was
All
important to you.
right. Well, like you touched on, a couple of episodes ago. Well, a couple of weeks ago, we had the episode and we discussed CRT. That made me look a little bit further back, and I wanted to know a little bit more about it because it's not something that's readily available. Well, it's readily available, but it wasn't something that was on my radar until we started talking about it. So, with the events of the last few years, and because critical race theory has suddenly become thrust into the mainstream, I felt like it would be a good thing for us to explore the theory and gain a deeper understanding. And in doing so, share what we find with anyone with a curiosity about how America's past directly affects today, its future. So we can learn and try to move forward. We do have a problem with race in this country, and we would be remiss and irresponsible if we didn't do what we could to learn where its origins began. It's not as simple as slavery. Slavery plays a part, but it's not as simple as slavery. But our overall goal with this 30-minute session, every time we do one of these lessons, is to educate ourselves and others. So we want to thank you guys for checking us out and taking the time to take this journey with us. So on the official note, because most of you will know us as CEO and the Doctor. My name is Dr. Stuart Proctor. I hold a doctorate in business administration. In addition, I've taught classes for Aspen University and Park University, respectively. My partner is Clyde Oliver. Clyde he holds a master's degree in occupational health and safety. For over 40 years, between the two of us, we've got over 40 years of combined military experience. The military is a microcosm of the United States itself. So we've both essentially dedicated our adult lives to the service of others, as well as educating young men and women serving our nation. So let's get this thing started.
AP, real quick, try to move your hand off the mic. It's rattling every time.
Okay. Yeah. I keep hitting it. All right. So CRT really came to the mainstream. So CRT has been taught in military settings for the universities for years, law schools for years, college settings for years. But it came into the mainstream in September 2020 when President Trump issued an executive order excluding federal contracts, anti-diversity and inclusion training interpreted as containing divisive concepts, race or sex stereotyping, and race and sex scapegoating. Among the content considered divisive was critical race theory. And in response, the African American Policy Forum, led by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, launched the hashtag Truth Be Told campaign to expose the harm that order poses. So as we move through the slides, CRT is not a diversity and inclusion training, but a practice interrogating the role of race and racism in our society. Um, we can all agree that race permeates everything. And for the most part, when you think about it, in any interaction that you have, um, race is not something that's is overt. It's usually subconscious. You know, we say and do things, people say and do things, and I don't really think that they consider how harmful, or at least the origins of where these feelings and thoughts come from. So as we move forward, you know, in this lesson, we're gonna definitely cover one such aspect. Clyde's going to talk about microaggression and what that means. So, as we move on, CRT critiques how the social construction of race and institutionalized racism perpetuates a racial caste system that relegates people of color to the bottom tiers. Now, because this type of system started during slavery and it kind of manifests itself historically, you know, we see it in how police interact with people of color. We've seen stuff all over the news, different interactions where it could be someone that's white that basically threatens the cops and nothing happens. Where on the other end of the spectrum, we see how cops interact with people of color, and that can be interpreted from historically. You know, black men have always been um, thought of as really aggressive. Not to mention the stereotype of, you know, where black men are, you know, usually committing crimes they're up to no good, et cetera, et cetera. And of late, black women have been labeled with the tag of being angry. You know, so you know these are not things that have just come up recently because of um, recent events. These are systemic. These are things that have come about, um, slavery, post-slavery, Jim Crow, etc., and they still permeate anything, any part of our society now. So again, another example is how, you know, black people are treated in hospitals. You know, I read a story recently about how um, black women are less likely, they're not thought of to feel pain in the same regard as white women. Now that's not something that um, someone's told directly. That had to have manifested itself through decades and decades and decades, so, and passed down systemically. And that's one of the things that CRT wants to look at, how systemically these things affect us racially. So
Right, right. So I'm gonna jump in here.
yeah,
So this has been around now for 40-ish years.
yeah,
And we could talk about, the works of Richard Delgado. He's looked at as one of the, originators of the theory. Um, but critical race theory questions the very foundations of liberal order. Basically taking a look at neutral principles of constitutional law. You know, over time, laws have been written and they've been written in a certain pen. With that pen comes, the disadvantage, so to speak, because we all know from day one, as this country was coming about, there was no one represented other than white people on the
right,
foundational councils, so to speak. So that's one thing that we're looking at. This is probably why this is such a hot button, because over time, as states develop their own thoughts and laws and everything like that they want to put into play, a lot of those things are now looked at as being, outdated, of course, and they're
hmm,
starting to erode. And a lot of states don't want to talk about this. One state that you can really highly, kind of bring to light is the state of Texas. You
yes,
got a hashtag. I won't repeat that. Texas is going to be my home one day.
yeah,
But the doc always says F Texas in the way they think. But that's something to think about. Something else to consider is that this is not, like really critical race, though it is, traditionally looked at as being all about black people trying to get, their rights. It's more than that. After the
yeah,
first decade or so of this being kind of put into play, we had Asian Americans come about, LGBT has an interest group, and Muslim and Arabs as well, especially after what happened after 9/11. They were all kind of seen in the same light as being that big T word, that being terrorist. And so that's something else that we have to educate ourselves on. This is not just something that is, pro-black, only black.
Right.
Critical race theory, is looked at all minority groups. We got to think at some point, all minorities in this country were at some type of disadvantage. We can go Japanese Americans after World War II. We can start with Native Americans from the
Native
very front.
Americans for sure. Yes, for the
We can
very,
start
very start.
there. Look at Hispanics right now, the type of things we've seen down at the border over the last 4 or 5 years. So this is not just, this is not just a movement by black people. It may have kind of, launched itself from that purview, but other disadvantaged and other disadvantaged races as well as groups, i.e., like I mentioned earlier, LGBT, have started to, definitely get in on this, trying to equal things out for them. And I'll let you jump back, P. We ready for slide yet?
Just ironically, you mentioned Native Americans. I read this article today about Native Americans are trying to reclaim property lands that belong to them. So when American settlers came over, they made agreements with the Native Americans that they would give them, well, they would stake claim to 35 million acres of property in South Dakota. This is just one of the stories. And America at the time reneged on that. Through manifest destiny, they took the land. Now, I want to really highlight that this is not about indicting white America today for the sins of the past. The only way that anything can be corrected is to look at this from a critical lens and look at how racism has embedded itself in the system of America.
True.
And the only way that this thing can be fixed is by all of us. This isn't finger pointing. And that's one of the things that is highlighted early in this curriculum is it's not about finger pointing. It's about looking at the system itself and finding where racism has taken a hold of it so that we can correct them now. We can correct these problems. And, when we talked about it, one of the things that I was very curious. And so you and I shared, different stuff about different reading, different books and stuff. So when you get a chance, I want you to show the book if you can. So it's become a hotbed topic and schools don't want to teach it. So this is just one avenue that the word can get out and we can make the information available. Now, the thing that, when you look at states like Texas and Florida, and even here in Arizona, the governor, Doug Ducey, banned any critical race theory from schools here in Arizona, signed it into law yesterday. What I think, and this is just human nature, anytime that you've told a child, don't do this, don't do that, they want to know why. And they go find out from their basic curiosity. So, yeah, as we move on, again, I want to highlight this is not an indictment of anyone for sins of the past. This is about trying to move forward and educate ourselves on where these problems lie so we can correct them. And the more information we have. So, next slide.
Yeah, I was gonna say taking a stance there. I misspoke. So we have to go back to Derek Bell. He is looked at as the actual father figure that started this back in the 70s. But to your point, maybe why Arizona and other states are looking to somewhat abolish it before it even has a chance is because honestly, when you think about the theory, what it looks at, it looks at that right there. They discuss the rise of biological racism in educational theory and practice and urge attention to the resegregation of American schools. So you might say, well, how is it being resegregated? Well, we look at how classism works. You know what I mean? Like we know money funnels to places that, kind of thrive, and the money doesn't funnel to the other places, inner city, urban, that type of thing.
Right.
And so without it actually being mandated, like, okay, you can't go to this school, you're almost kind of told, well, you can't go to this school. You can't afford to be there. And then we also look at, their philosophy comes from when we talk about the CRT activists and anyone behind the movement. They question the Anglocentric curriculum and charge that many educators apply a deficit theory approach to schooling the minority kids. So again, we're looking
Right.
at how money plays a part in what's being actually taught. And then we think about how these texts are being written. We all know, and this is not just us assuming things, because this is us actually talking about the way we lived. But we know
Yeah.
anything that talks about slavery, very small chapter.
Yeah.
Anything
It's
that
all
talks about
minimized.
civil rights movement, very small chapter. As BLM and that type of things started to get added into text, it's a good bet that it's probably going to be a very small chapter. And those are the
Yeah.
things that we're looking at talking about. It's not rewriting history, it's telling all the history. That's the
Right.
key. A lot of people look at it as, oh, well, you're trying to rewrite history. In all actuality, we're just trying to tell you the entire history. And there, that becomes the problem. That becomes where the pushback becomes, because they think that that history's already been told,
Yeah.
i.e., the 4th of July and why we love our flag and this, that, and other, not necessarily what everyone living under that flag had to endure and go through.
Right.
So now
Yeah.
let's talk about this next slide. Go ahead, P.
All right. So there's there's key tenets to it, and part of this lesson highlights four of them. So one of them is recognition that race is not biologically real, but socially constructed and socially significant. Race is a product of social thought and is not connected to biological reality. Look, ultimately, we are all people. We all bleed red, So
And
in the grand scheme of things, but when you look, because people come from different areas, geographic areas, different climates, etc., we're all going to have different hues in our skin. And
language, all of that. Yes.
through history, through America's history, through the history of man, these differences have been pitted against one another.
Absolutely.
So it's not something that, like I said, it's not something that's biological. It's something that socially people have done to one another.
Very true.
And that's something that I don't know if it can be undone, but it's something that we need to stop paying making a huge deal out of. So one of another tenet, these are just, I'm speaking from bullet points, but the slides go further into it. The information that we gleaned all this stuff, the place where we gleaned all this stuff from, we're going to post those at the end, so you'll have access to them. We'll post them on Facebook, and we'll post them on our Instagram, as well as in the comments on YouTube. Since we mentioned YouTube, please, we want you to watch, like, and subscribe. Please bring other friends, anybody else that you think might be interested along with you and us on this journey. Another thing, acknowledgement that racism is a normal feature of society and is embedded within systems and institutions.
I'm gonna jump in.
Go ahead.
Because the big thing here, and this is something that really, really people struggle with, is that we need to absolutely realize that racism is somewhat ordinary. It is ordinary.
Yes,
this is what we live in. This is the climate that we live in. No matter how much we want to highlight how great our country is, how prosperous it is, capitalism is the best way, on, and et cetera, and et cetera. At the end of the day, racism within this community, which is the United States of America, is very ordinary. We've been fighting against it since the beginning. It still lives, though it may have improved because it's not as blatant as it once was.
Yeah.
But it's still very much there. And that's something that I feel like a lot of people push back on CRT, because you have to accept that first.
Yeah.
And that's all racist.
Definitely.
That's all racist. That is all racist. I have these conversations amongst, individuals of color, and they say, well, how can a black person be racist? When you say something like that, you haven't even understood, in my opinion, what racism is. Yeah. Just because our race has been the one that is, highlighted for being, the one that's been mistreated and everything else under the sun, it doesn't mean that we can't give the same energy off. If you innately hate somebody, you innately, feel a certain way. Yes, that is a feeling of bigotry, but it's also driven to a point where it's just like, I don't want to associate with anybody that's not black or anybody that's not my country. That's innately and inherently racist and it's ordinary. Not saying that it should be accepted. It just needs to be that it's in our system. It's in our system. It's in our
Yeah.
country, and it's something that probably you will never ever be able to completely eradicate, but it's there. Okay, so
And
that's
in my opinion, that's the starting point. You
yes,
know, once we as a people come to an agreement that, yeah, this is a part of America's fabric. This is a part of what we are as a nation. We can do better. We can be better because we know more about it. We're more aware. We're more accepting that this is it's not a one-off. This isn't something that's just happening right now. This has been happening for centuries in this country. And
it's not
when you think
acknowledged.
about it, it's this is not something that's new, and that's one of the main things, the main talking points of this. And again, once we acknowledge that this exists, that we do have, that it's a part of what we are as a nation, we can do better and we can move forward.
All right, what's that third tenant
All
P?
right, the third one, and we just talked about it. CRT recognizes that it is the systemic nature of racism that bears primary responsibility for reproducing racial inequality. Again, the systems that are in place, the legal system being one of them. You know, why is it that a black man with the same amount of coke can be busted and get a worse sentence than a white man that has the same amount of cocaine? You know,
I think
why
yeah,
is it
yeah. No, go ahead, go ahead. I'm sorry.
you know why is it that the crack epidemic was viewed with such disdain while the opioid epidemic has become a national crisis?
Yeah, I think you have to
You know,
begin at the starting point. Whereas, right here it says CRT recognizes that racism is coded in law. Well, from jump, we were looked at as 3/5 of a person.
yeah,
So though that's changed, though that's been removed, the idea behind how the system was created has not. It wasn't as if, the entire Constitution got written. The bills have changed and they're
yeah,
constantly being amended over time, but certain things were written into place. Like we had to fight a whole war about slavery, for a person to be free, to not be
yeah,
looked at as livestock or any other type of property. So what I'm getting at is that stuff is deeply rooted because we still do what? We give our service and our lives to this flag. We bleed and die on the constitutional rights that we, have been awarded. But these things still started in a mindset where
yeah,
everyone was not created equal. I think that's something that you constantly have to put into the atmosphere to let people understand that though you change the law doesn't mean that the law wasn't written with that same intent,
yeah,
and that's the problem that people don't want
yeah.
to accept.
And if we're being, I guess, non-judgmental, a lot of these things could have been written um, subconsciously. Well, I'm going to write this way and exclude people of color. I don't think that was the thought at the time. It was already determined when the Constitution, etc., was written. Black people are 3/5 human, so that didn't need to be acknowledged further. Now, the Constitution written as it was then, and the different amendments, etc., as we've moved forward in time, has never truly overtly acknowledged this is where we went wrong, and we need to clearly state this is what equality means in this country. Equality for every man, woman, child, regardless of race, creed, color, whoever they are. That clearly, to me, it clearly needs to be stated. But as we explore what CRT is, we have to fully acknowledge that the possibilities strongly exist that um, while these things have carried over through centuries, through generations, they may not have been done um, anything more than subconsciously. But
Okay.
we have to live it every day. One of the last tenets, embracing a lived experience of people of color, including those preserved through storytelling, rejecting deficit informed research that excludes the epistemologies of people of color. When you talked about history and how our history is just gleaned over slavery and any Jim Crow is if there's any history involving people of color that is thought to be controversial, it's given almost no time whatsoever in the history books, in the educational construct. People have to go and hunt out and find deeper meaning, more information, which is similar to CRT, what we have to do here, you know, and it's as though the system itself, and again, highlighting the system, the institutions that the kind of what's the word I'm looking for, that acknowledge, hey, they the systems and the institutions further this deficit of information by
Well,
choice.
you're looking at a 200-year, difference. The country
Yeah.
is 244, 245-ish years. CRT has only been around for, 40 plus.
Yeah.
So ultimately what I'm saying is, like no one's going to go back and recant history books. I mean, because
Right.
if you do that, it's almost like illegitimizing your entire education system. Look at the baby boomers, right? It's like saying everything they learned was false, though we know a
Right.
lot of that is absolutely true. The acceptance of I learned that in school and
Yeah.
that's my gospel is hard for them to, I guess, get rid of. Like, no, like this is maybe why I raised my hand and decided to join whatever war I went off to, like.
Yeah.
So now you want to tell me that, I should have a different principled thought. That's going to be very difficult to do. And I hate to say this, but I've heard this over time discussing CRT or just in general. Sometimes for certain bad traits or habits that die off, literally they have to die off, if you know what I mean. So you got to wait people out. But that's not to me, that's not a
that's not a solution.
It's not a solution at all. That's, because I feel like, that's innately accepting, well, this person's not going to change. They just who they are. We all have the ability to in our heart if we want to, but do we want to? You got to start with there. Do you truly want to accept these certain facts? Do you want to look at anybody that's a minority in a different light than you've been told to, however long that's been, if you're a young adult, middle-aged adult, or you're an elderly person, do you all of a sudden want to look at something in a whole different light from your upbringing, whether that's small town America or big inner city? But we all have developed a certain thought about everything that we know to be true in this world. And when it comes to race, Black people have their certain thoughts toward white people. White people have their certain thoughts toward Black people. And you can do this for every other, cultural nationality, whatever you want to. But do you want to look at people in a different light? It boils down to that. We could talk about the 4 tenets, and I'm sure in future we'll break these down even further. Yeah. But at the end of the day, until you want to accept what's changing around you, we had this on our podcast not too long. Whether you want to accept it or not, the world is changing around you.
Whether you like it or not, it's going to happen. It's happening.
Exactly.
And we've talked about racism dying out through attrition. Racial thoughts might do that, but as long as these institutions remain the way that they are, by avoiding America's past, avoiding the things that are controversial in its present, the future is going to remain the same as it is, the same as our past and our present, because we're failing to own up to what's wrong. We're denying history. We're denying a huge part of America's history. So that being said, we wanted to take a look at how race subconsciously affects thought processes. And, Clyde he did some research on microaggression. So, hey, the floor is yours, my brother.
All right. So let's think about things that I feel like we all at some point have encountered, and you have a certain feeling in your stomach, like a bad feeling in your stomach or your mind or whatever, but you may just rationalize with yourself, well, that's just the way it is. Think about when you're a Black man and you step onto an elevator and it's only a white woman and she puts herself in the corner and grips her purse. What makes her feel that all of a sudden you're a threat to her because you entered the same elevator and she's quote unquote alone? Or, I have another one up here taking a whole different approach from a different ethnic group, because I've been in classes where, we always say ESL and stuff like that, but we never give the thought process to, well, maybe this individual was born here, right?
Right.
Maybe his parents or their parents, at some point came to the country, but maybe they were born here. So just because that's a Hispanic person or someone that's an Asian American, why should I think that the first words that come out of their mouth or the way they speak, their dialect, won't be anything other than English? Because I'm only looking at their face and they look different. So no way they sound like I sound, so how do they feel in that situation? There's many other, we talked about for years, black quarterbacks were seen as this, like, I don't even know, like you couldn't do it.
They were incapable.
Yeah, that's where you were going to. Like, there's no difference in our genetic makeup, but we were always thought to be inferior in the mind. So no way we could, process certain things like that. And there's so many other microaggressions that become part of our ordinary life. And what ends up happening over time, and it's almost like a post-traumatic syndrome, is that we just accept these things, right?
Yeah.
I accept the fact that when I walk into a mall and I'm in a store that doesn't, quote unquote, fit my profile, it's a higher end store.
You're going to be followed.
I'm going to be followed. I'm going to be looked at harder. I'm going to keep getting softly harassed by being asked, is there anything I can help you with? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Try to play that off as if they're being very nice and they want to help me, but in all actuality, I am to them a threat. Why am I in here? But we accept that. Well, that's just being black in America. As long as my money's spent, I guess, this is what I have to endure. But anybody else that came in there that didn't look like me and happened to look like them is, hey, how you doing? Welcome to whatever, blah, blah, blah. Let me know if you need help. And they might not ever get looked at again.
Yeah.
You can look at going and trying to buy a car. Perhaps maybe I'm going to walk into the door and they're going to see me and be like, BMW. I think maybe this is the wrong place for this guy. Let's try to get him out here. His credit probably not right for this place.
Yeah.
And things of that nature, because it's just seen that a certain classism brings you a certain value. And that's just based off of looks at times. And we've seen that. And we can go back to the 30s and 40s and 50s, how difficult it was for black individuals to get loans. And that's still current today, but we talk about trying to buy a home, and then they're getting like crazy inflated prices, or crazy inflated interest rates, which making what they're paying for their home not equal to what somebody of, white demographic is paying for their home. These are the things that are embedded and scarcely talked about because how bad it sounds today. I think one thing that the internet has done over time, it is made information readily available, like you always said, but it also puts things in your face in a sense of you can't escape this. Back in the day,
you cannot.
You had to go to the library and read something, right? I got to check out a book. How much effort do I want to put into being knowledgeable on this, right?
Now,
you could Google it.
Give me a few minutes. It's right there in your hand. And that's why. That's one of the things that I'm optimistic about. Sure, politicians can deny CRT exists. They can deny access to it in our educational systems. But again, access to information is not only in schools these days.
Right.
So I'm optimistic that this will at least begin to educate America as a whole on the concept of race and how race permeates all walks of life. Every system that governs, that runs, that operates in our country, it does. And again, this isn't an indictment of anyone. This is only highlighting, basically, like I always say, it's like we're highlighting the bad parts of a marriage that we want to fix. Because in reality, we are all in a relationship with the country that we love.
Yeah.
That pretty much sums it up to me, So we're going to continue to do these lessons, and we're going to post the information as we move forward, before each lesson, so it's readily available, and you folks, everybody will know when it's going to be posted on YouTube. Again, we're going to make this central to YouTube. It won't be Facebook Live or anything like that. So because it's YouTube, please subscribe and like.
Share.
Thank you. And share. Thank you.
Yeah, no, before we close out, I also just kind of want to, put this all in one big, summarization. Why is this important? A lot of people try to use that, well, we understand, like now we see, like we heard the NFL say we should have listened. They got all these catchphrases and slogans and all this other
Yeah,
stuff, yet they don't want to do the work, which is to, no kidding, put the idea into play. It's one thing to be like, I'm sorry, right? But there's another thing to have action behind your sorry. So what I'm saying is, if you're truly understanding of what's being said, if you really understand someone, do us a favor and show us. You show
yeah,
us by changing curriculum. You show us by removing laws that have been inherently racist since they were even put into play. You change things by putting people who make these terrible choices in race relations on the, blast, so to speak. And we've seen that. We got to applaud the ones who've done right by that.
yeah,
We've seen the racist white guy who went bananas and viral the other day. We seen what happened to him. He got arrested. Everybody showed up at his door. They made it rough on him. Okay, good. Keep bringing people to the light like that. Also, continue to hold them accountable as well. But the
yeah,
key in all this is, because it's important, have the conversation with the ones you love most. That's when you really make change.
yeah,
Because you know what? I shouldn't have to continue to condition my black sons for fear that a white cop might harm them. So in actuality, if you're a white person, you should be talking to your, family, your sons, your daughters about why you need to treat everyone straight across the board the
the
same.
same,
We
the
shouldn't see
same. No
a
matter,
color.
no, yeah, no matter what.
Exactly.
See them for who they are, not for who you assume that they are, not for what um, the rumor mill or stereotypes have told you.
Exactly.
Experience it for yourself, and that's been the thing that has made this such a controversial subject, is that it's been made to be something that it's not. It's not trying to tear America apart at its fabric. It's not. It's we just want history as a whole to reflect what actually happened and how it still permeates society today.
And CRT truly comes from a place of people tired of accepting something that's not fair and not true, and also being tired of having to condition themselves to live in the same country, pay the same taxes, want the same life, but ours have to come in a different respect to someone else's. That's it. That's the bottom line, man. So this has been 30 minutes of CRT with CO and the doctor. Thank you for anyone that tuned in. Remember, listen, like, share. This is only YouTube. I'm gonna post this on Facebook. The doc will post on our Instagram. But we're gonna keep this thing going. We got a couple new subscriptions a day. So I thank you for that. Keep putting the word out there, because this is way different, whole different segment than our
Yeah.
traditional podcast. So we appreciate you guys. You guys have a lovely evening. See you on the doctor. We out.